When many of us first heard about the FBI search of Donald Trump's resort home on Monday, we heard it from Trump himself in a rambling statement published to donaldjtrump.com. Quote, "What is the difference between this and Watergate, where operatives broke into the Democrat National Committee? Here in reverse, Democrats broke into the home of the 45th President of the United States." Of course, it's a bizarre and false comparison. Federal agents obtained and executed a search warrant approved by a judge to comb Mar-a-Lago for evidence of a possible crime. And they did it without any knowledge or participation by the Biden administration, a White House official tells NBC News. It's a far cry from Watergate, when Richard Nixon's re-election campaign paid a team of burglars to break into the Democratic Party's campaign headquarters in the Watergate Hotel. And Nixon tried to cover up his involvement in the Dirty Tricks campaign by firing top Justice Department officials. Watergate led to an impeachment inquiry and to Nixon's resignation. It became the gold standard for political corruption and misconduct. A line in the sand for future presidents. Trump knows that, which is why he loves to say his perceived political enemies are worse than Watergate. In the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton's email story was bigger than Watergate. So was the Mueller investigation into the Trump campaign's ties to Russia. And when the Donald falsely claimed that President Obama had wiretapped Trump Tower, he made sure to throw in a Nixon-Watergate callback. Trump has used the Watergate line so often that multiple news outlets have written multiple trend stories about it over the years, though perhaps none were as cutting as the satirical Onion headline. Quote, "Just know it's far worse than whatever President Water did," says Trump explaining Obamagate. But why else would Trump want to redefine Watergate? Perhaps it has to do with Trump and Nixon's long-time mutual admiration. They were friends, in fact. Back in the 80s, long before Trump was beaming about the love letter he reportedly got from North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, the future president got a warm note from former President Nixon saying his wife Pat predicted that, quote, "Whenever you decide to run for office, you will be a winner." And just compare the two men's approach to their office. Here was Nixon after leaving the White House talking about presidential power.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
And here, 43 years later, was Trump lawyer Alan Dershowitz defending the then president in his first impeachment trial.
The president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest. That cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
A bit uncanny. Of course, Trump's memory of Watergate may be selective and self-serving, but what about the people who investigated it? Like Jill Wine-Banks, a federal prosecutor who at barely 30 found herself cross-examining Nixon's secretary about the gap in the White House tapes. Or Elizabeth Holtzman, a freshman congresswoman and member of the Judiciary Committee who helped write the articles of impeachment against Nixon. So who better to ask than these two about Trump's Watergate obsession and the real parallels between then and now? And they joined me. Elizabeth Holtzman voted to impeach Nixon as a young member of Congress in 1974, and she's now running for Congress again in New York's crowded 10th district. She's also the author of the 2019 book, The Case for Impeaching Trump. Jill Wine-Banks is a former assistant Watergate special prosecutor, an MSNBC political contributor, and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast. Thank you both for being here. Liz, let me start with you. In his statement on Monday's search, Trump tried to compare it to the Watergate break-in. But the impeachment of Nixon wasn't just about one break-in and cover-up, was it? It was about a pattern of abuse of power from Washington all the way to Cambodia. And we see that pattern of abuse of power with Trump as well.
Of course, I mean, the comparison is absurd. There you had private individuals breaking into the Democratic headquarters without a search warrant to try to interfere with an election. Here, what you have apparently, well, certainly you have FBI agents, they're government agents. Secondly, there was a search warrant approved by a judge. It was done, and as I understand it, in conformance with all the requirements. So there is no comparison with Watergate, which was an illegal break-in. Trump has to go and challenge this. He hasn't done that. Aside from the fact, yes, apparently what's involved here are classified materials that should have been returned to the U.S. government that former President Trump has no business holding on to, and that may be a violation of law to fail to turn over. And also, as you mentioned, Watergate was involved, the impeachment of Richard Nixon and Watergate involved more than just the cover-up and the break-in. It involved a cover-up
Yes.
that had many parts, and it had illegal wiretaps, the enemies list, auditing, break into Ellsberg psychiatrist's office, and on and on and on.
Jill, the White House says it didn't know in advance about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, but a search for former president's residence had to be approved at the highest levels of the DOJ, right? Andrew Weissman was just telling me before the break he thinks Merrick Garland had to have signed off on it. Does this change? You and I have talked so much, especially during the 1/6 public hearings, about Merrick Garland, about the DOJ. Does this change your view of how Merrick Garland and the DOJ are handling Donald Trump?
It does. I think that in the last few weeks, my opinion has changed. As you know, I have been very critical of the pace of the investigation
Yes.
and of the seeming urgency that I saw. But I think the Department of Justice is now totally on top of this, not just because of this search warrant, which we don't know yet. We haven't seen the search warrant. So everything I say is basically speculation at this point. All the reporting does seem to say that it revolves around highly classified information that he shouldn't have, or at least documents that belong to the government, that under our system of justice, he should not have them, whether they are classified or not. They belong in the archives. And so that's a violation of law. And apparently he's being steadfast in his refusal to cooperate. 15 cartons were removed from Mar-a-Lago in the past. Another 12 seem to have been removed just now. That's a lot of information. We don't know if it's only documents in there. We have to wait and see. We
Yeah.
don't know what crime is specified in the search warrant because we haven't seen the search warrant. But whatever it is, there's no question that Merrick Garland is now stepping up
Yes.
to bat and is going after crimes.
Maybe Donald Trump kept all those boxes of documents because he just wanted to read documents in his spare time. We know what a big reader Donald Trump is. Liz, let me ask you this. One big difference between Watergate and today is that the Nixon impeachment in Congress was fairly bipartisan in terms of Republicans trooping to the White House to tell Nixon he needs to stand down, in terms of Republicans saying this is outrageous what has happened. How would you have proceeded? Would you have been able to proceed back then if you had had the likes of a Kevin McCarthy and a Jim Jordan and a Marjorie Taylor Greene in the House of Representatives, basically acting as Nixon's propagandists and shields?
Well, Nixon had a lot of supporters in the House of Representatives. Don't forget that. In fact, when we voted on impeachment, there were 7 Republicans who supported the impeachment against Nixon, but there were more Republicans who voted against it. He had firm bulldog supporters on his side. But what happened was that when the smoking gun tape came out, which showed that Nixon himself, out of his own mouth, ordered the cover-up within days of the break-in, then it was impossible for them to back off. I don't know what would happen today, but this impeachment was conducted in a very different manner. The House Judiciary Committee impeachment was conducted with a Republican counsel for the Democrats to send a message that we wanted to be fair. This was not done that way. Also, the impeachment uncovered, as you mentioned, a plethora of abuses of power, ranging from illegal wiretaps to ordering audits of his political enemies to ordering break-ins and so forth. So it was different. This was conducted in a different, more partisan fashion.
Yes.
Could it have turned out differently? I don't know.
It's not just more partisan, it's unhinged from reality. You mentioned the smoking gun tape. If there was an equivalent tape today, Republicans would just say, we don't believe it. It's made up. It's the deep state. That's the problem we have today. Jill, another big difference now is the abuse and demonization of investigators, of the DOJ, of even Trump aides turned witnesses, calling them partisans and deep state actors, allegations of harassment of witnesses. How much abuse did you and your witnesses get then, say, compared to what members of the House January 6th committee and their witnesses are getting? Could Watergate have turned out differently if, say, John Dean had been intimidated into silence?
Well, of course, it was very different. That isn't to say that there weren't attacks on us. And in fact, I believe we were called a witch hunt, too. Nowadays, of course, if it is a witch hunt, the witch is Donald Trump, because that's who's being hunted. But I think it was very different back then. And the bipartisanship really did exist. And Rodino, who was the chair of the committee doing the impeachment, was very good at bringing in the Republicans into the investigation and getting them to be the sponsors of articles of impeachment. And remember, it was Barry Goldwater and the other two top leaders of Congress from the Republican side who went to the White House after the special prosecutor got the smoking gun tape. And they learned about it. They believed it. We weren't in an era of alternative reality. We were in an era where facts mattered, and there was only one set of facts. All the networks agreed on what the facts were. All the Republicans did too.
Those innocent days when there was just one set of facts. Liz, last question to you. When you were first elected to Congress at the age of 31, you were the youngest woman in the history of that body to serve. And now, half a century later, you are running in the crowded Democratic primary this month for an open house seat in New York City. If elected, you would make history again as the oldest non-incumbent to win. Why should voters send you back to Congress now? And why would you even want to be in Congress again?
Easy, because I'm not someone who likes to sit on the sidelines. And easy because voters understand what kind of threat we're under at this point. We have a Supreme Court that has decided that women can't control their own bodies and making other threats. We have a former president who wants to come back by fraud and possibly violence. We have MAGA Republicans. We need somebody who has a record of taking down presidents. We have to have somebody who's got a record of taking on the extreme right. I've done that. For example, I got the Equal Rights Amendment extended against the efforts of Phyllis Schlafly and the extreme right wing. I was involved in the impeachment of Richard Nixon, as you know, and that removed him from office. And not only that, but defanged him, and he never came back. I also took on changing the rape laws in this country. I took on Nazi war criminals. So I've got a long record of taking on big problems, tough problems, and solving them. Can't sit on the sidelines when this kind of danger is going on.